The Fest Chronicles we on. The Fest Chronicles, it's time to go. And it's that podcast, hosted by Jeffrey Jones. The best in travel adventure. You go, you tell them we sent you. Them activities, we the ones trotting the globe. Everything that's going on, bringing it right to your home.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Fest Chronicles. In this episode, we cover a festival rich in history that celebrates the community of artisans worldwide. Many of us are familiar with the common refrain, you don't know what you have until it's gone. And as a child who lived with my grandparents the first 6 years of my life, I can attest to that statement truly. As a child, I pretty much had free reign over my grandparents' house, running all throughout the house. And every room was my playground. But a third room served as a guest room, and a room where my grandmother had different mementos and the quilts that she crafted. There were times when I had to sit still when the ladies from church would come over and they would all get together with my grandmother and work on their quilts while loudly singing gospel hymns. So you can imagine that wasn't exactly my favorite time as a 6-year-old. But when my grandmother passed away 25 years ago, I really began to think of her often. And one of the things that triggered my thoughts on her is when I would see a quilt. And for me, it's one of those moments where I wish I had secured one of her quilts as a keepsake. I now have an appreciation for quilts that I never would have imagined when I was that 6-year-old kid. But that brings me to our guest today. And the festival we're covering is the Houston International Quilt Festival. And Mr. Bob Ruggiero will be our guest, and he will talk about the Houston International Quilt Festival, taking place October 9th through the 12th, 2025 at the George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston, Texas. Mr. Ruggiero, welcome to the Fest Chronicles.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for having me. And that's a great story about your grandmother.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she has many great stories, but that's one of the ones that I remember most often. Bob, can you tell us about your involvement with the Houston International Quilt Festival and how you got started with it?
Sure. I'm the Vice President of Communications for Quilts Incorporated. So we produce International Quilt Festival, which is the public show, the largest quilt festival in the world, and also International Quilt Market, which is our trade show. So I'm in charge of all the PR, website, social media, marketing, chief cook and bottle washer. If the printer goes down here in the office, I take care of that too.
Wow, awesome. A man with many responsibilities. Well, let me ask you this. We obviously can't talk about the Houston International Quilt Festival unless we talk about the founder. Can you give us a little, tell us about the founder and how this began? I've read so much information about it, but I think I'll let you tell the audience because she just has such an amazing story.
She does. Our founder is Carrie Bressenhan, and she's an amazing woman. Really kind of created this business and is a member of the Quilters Hall of Fame. So how this whole thing started was way back in the early mid-70s. Carrie was running for political office to be a state representative here in Texas, and she campaigned all the time, and unfortunately she lost her election, but fortunately for the quilt industry, Quilt Festival got started. What happened is that she borrowed a lot of money from friends and family for her campaign, and she wanted to pay all that back. So after the election was over, she and her mother-in-law decided to open an antique shop here in Houston called Great Expectations, which was after her favorite novel. And so they sold a lot of antiques, but there was a lot of bare space on the walls. So in order to cover that up, she would put up just some of her family quilts because Carrie's a 5th-generation Texas quilter. Her mother was an avid quilter, and they just kept putting up more quilts on these bare walls. Well, pretty soon more people were coming into the store were asking about the quilts than the antiques, and they even wanted to buy some. So Carrie felt that she was onto something, so the antique store slowly became a quilt store.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I saw somewhere where she said that she believed in the adage, when life gives you lemons, turn it into lemonade. And so that is really remarkable that she was able to do that. Let me ask you this. So it's called Great. So it went from the antique store to it was called Great Expectations Quilts. How long is that still in business, or how long did that go?
That went for a little over 30 years here in Houston in a couple of different locations. And how the festival actually started is at the end of her first year in business in 1975, she decided to throw kind of a thank you party for her customers. So she invited a few quilt dealers selling antique quilts, some authors, and things like that. So she was expecting probably about, I don't know, a few dozen people to come to this, what was her first quilt festival in her shop. Well, she was really surprised to see over 200 people lined up around the block to get into this quilt festival, and so it proved to be a whole lot more popular than she thought it would be. One of the stories that I always like to hear is that some of the quilt dealers who were there started packing up a little bit early before the festival was over in her shop. And Carrie asked them why, and the dealers were telling her, "Well, we're selling so many quilts here, we're not going to have anything left for the next show we have to go to." So it was after that first kind of thank you party, the first quilt festival, that things just kind of grew and grew and grew from there.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Now, Carrie, you mentioned earlier she's in the Quilters Hall of Fame, but she did so many things that I can't possibly cover when I was doing the research on her. But one of the things I found out that was the co-director of the Texas Quilt Museum. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, the Texas Quilt Museum is in LaGrange, Texas, and it was co-founded in 2011 by Carrie Bresenhan and her cousin, who also happens to be the vice president of Quilts Incorporated, Nancy O'Brien Puentes. And she always wanted a special spot in Texas where she could showcase year-round not only Texas quilt makers, but quilters from around the world. So that museum has been going since 2011, and we get visitors from all over the country, all over the world that come to the Texas Quilt Museum.
Wow, folks. So that's in LaGrange, Texas. That's right between Houston and Austin, right?
Yeah, very convenient to get to from Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and LaGrange is really, really what you think of when you think of like a charming small Texas town.
Awesome, awesome. Now, another thing that she did that I found really fascinating was her ability to quilt. I think from what I read, hundreds of quilts in the Texas state capitol. And I just thought, wow, what a feat. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, that was the Great Texas Quilt Search, where Carrie and Nancy would travel all over the state looking for quilts to display and having people come out and tell their family stories. And Carrie and Nancy are both quilt experts, so they would tell them a little bit about the history of the patterns and things to do with the quilts. And they arranged to have hundreds of them displayed in the rotunda of the Texas State Capitol. And to my knowledge, that's never been done again since then, but it certainly provided an incredible visual impact when you walked into that building, in a building that's already very impressive.
Yes. I had a chance to look at that, and the audience will get to see it if you're watching it on YouTube. But there's a photograph of it in a book that you sent me by Teresa Wong. I hope I'm saying that name right. Magic and Memories. And it's just really, really, it was just amazing. So I wish I could have been there to see that now, but nevertheless, there's documented history of it. Really, really nice. Even though this doesn't have anything to do, it just shows you how accomplished Carrie is. I saw in the biography that she's also, well, at one time she was the mayor of Piney Point Village. I was just like, man, this woman has covered the whole gamut.
She's quite an accomplished woman, and probably one of her proudest moments, her and Nancy, was when they testified in front of the U.S. Congress about a case involving companies overseas that were reproducing American quilts for very cheap prices. And Carrie, Nancy, and quilters all over the country felt that just wasn't right. It was cheapening the art form and the artistry of quilting. So they gathered thousands of signatures from quilters all over the country and testified before Congress to kind of put the brakes on these copies of quilts being made overseas. And they were successful in that.
Excellent. Yes, I saw that. Wow, that is That it just shows you the person who's passionate about something, they're going to also fight for what they believe in about their passion. So that's very remarkable. Now you mentioned after her first year of business, she threw like a party or appreciation, and so many people came that's basically how the festival was born out of that. Uh, can you tell us? And so eventually, I guess, I heard the research showed that it was at different locations. Went to the Shamrock Hotel, which people from Houston will know that's an institution hotel. It's one of the most famous hotels back in its day. But eventually, it got big enough where it moved to the George R. Brown Convention Center. And if I remember correctly, 1987. Can you explain to the audience how big of a deal that was? Not only because it's a big place, but it was the first public show there at the George R. Brown Convention Center.
That was true, and the George R. Brown is still our home for the fall shows. As the festival kind of continued to grow, we needed larger and larger spaces. So it kind of grew from the basement of Carrie's shop to churches to gymnasiums to, as you mentioned, the historic Shamrock Hilton, Albert Thomas Convention Center. These are all names that'll be very familiar to Houstonians. But eventually we grew into needing to be at the George R. Brown Convention Center. And at the peak of festival, we took over all 5 hallways of the George R. Brown Convention Center. We were the largest convention in the city with upwards of 60,000 people coming from nearly 40 different countries. So I'm always people are always amazed when they think about what, little quilt show, and it's really it's a big business, and it attracts so many creative and artistic people from all over the world and all over the United States.
Right. But so let me ask you this. You mentioned the numbers of the people. I've seen 40,000, 53,000. And it's just amazing to me because I never in a million years would have thought that many people were into quilts. I just was never a part of that world. But what do you think? Why do you think the festival has seen such consistent growth over this time?
I think it's because more and more people are learning to appreciate the artistry of what quilting is. Now, I know when a lot of people think of quilts, they think of, maybe the Waltons or something, grandma on the back porch with quilts that had, the early uses were very utilitarian. You used quilts to keep warm. You used quilts to use. But over the past few decades, that's really transformed into quilting as an art form, just like painting, just like sculpture, just like anything else. And today's quilts are mostly made to be hung on the wall and seen as art, and not necessarily to be used. So as more and more people started to appreciate the artistry of quilts, whether they quilted or not themselves, they like to come to festival to be able to see. We typically have 1,200 to 1,300 quilts on display. So you could literally come to our festival, which also has classes, which also has vendors, and not even necessarily make it into those areas. You could spend all day just looking at quilts. And I'm always excited when I see somebody who comes to the show and they just look at something that's amazing and go, wow, that's a quilt, and they can't believe it.
It's just in the research that I've done over the past couple of weeks about it. It's just floored me how it is such an integral part of culture, not just the United States, all over. And it's really something that I'm truly impressed by. But I saw that at one time that you had expanded into other cities like Chicago, Long Beach. Are you still doing that? And is there a difference in the quilting culture in these different places?
Not exactly. Different pockets of the country might like art quilting more than traditional quilting. And then there's also modern quilting. So our road shows tend to be not as big as Houston. Houston is considered the mecca, the big place of quilting. And the road shows kind of give a chance for people who can't make it to Houston to be able to still see our show and be part of a festival that might be a little closer to their home.
Great, great. Now, circle back when you mentioned that people may not be able to make it to Houston, but I guess Houston is considered the Mecca because there's a phrase that I found that in articles that I researched and things you sent me that they use the term "do Houston." Can you kind of tell me how that phrase came about?
Well, it's always amazing. Every year I meet so many people that, groups of mostly ladies that have saved all year or saved for years to be able to come to Houston because it is such the epicenter, as I mentioned, the mecca of quilting. And so that becomes almost like a bucket list item for people to do. I hear it all the time. I've talked to husbands who've surprised their wives with trips to Houston, and they've been just simply overjoyed by it. And there's just so much to do. Again, we have almost 1,300 quilts on display, over 250 classes and lectures of all skill levels, hundreds of vendors selling everything from finished quilts to sewing machines, patterns, books, notions, antiques. So there's something for really everybody at the show. But yeah, Houston is considered the epicenter.
Great, great. What now? Let me ask you this. Earlier, we talked about. I told you, kind of my perception of quilting is I thought it was something old ladies did. Growing up as a child, that's all I saw, and it never impacted me much until, as I spoke earlier about my grandmother passing away, and you even brought that up. Women on the back porch, old ladies on the back porch. But why do you think now? Or let me ask you this: the demographics. How have you seen the demographics change over the years? And are men involved in quilting? And why do you think it resonates with such a broad audience?
I think because of the freedom that people have in creating a quilt. I mean, there's no set way, no set style, no set technique. You do whatever you like to do in terms of how you put the quilt together, how you design it. It's just it's such open-ended creativity that people can participate in. I think that's very exciting for people as well. The vast majority of quilters are female, usually 55 and up, but we do have quite a number of men who are doing it as well.
Awesome, awesome. Well, that's good to know. Let me ask you this. So, how would you say the Quilt Festival, the Houston International Quilt Festival, fostered a global community in the quilting world?
I think the great thing about festival is people meeting each other. I mean, people are very friendly when they come to the show, and they're interested in meeting other people. So we'll have, U.S. quilters meeting Australian quilters, meeting Japanese quilters, and the language might be a bit of a barrier, but everybody gets excited about, again, the artistry and creativity of quilting. In more recent years, we've seen a lot of people who are maybe online friends or part of online quilting groups or email pen pals or something like that. And they might be writing each other for years or seeing each other on Zoom for a long time. And then they finally get to meet in Houston. And I've seen just so many, happy, first time reunions of quilters who get to meet each other at Houston. And that
Wow, that's
also kind
really
of goes
awesome.
to it also kind of goes to what you were saying about your grandmother, where she was involved with a quilting bee, and there's a lot of history and importance with women's history about quilting bees because this is where women would be able to kind of get together and really talk amongst themselves, and while they're all working on quilts at the same time, they're also getting to share stories about their lives and their concerns and whether it's a social group or, as in your grandmother's case, a church group. It was really a chance for women to get together and share and enjoy each other's company while they're creating something for their families.
Let me ask you this. So when we talk about exhibits, one exhibit that I saw that you guys had was the 20th century's 100 best American quilts. And can you tell me a little bit about that and what made it, how did they decide what was the 100 best?
Sure. Well, that was around 1999, so everybody was coming out with their, best of the century, 100 best of this, for everything, movies, books, music, and anything like that. So Carrie and Nancy said, well, there should be something for the 100 best quilts throughout history. So they were part of a panel of quilt experts that kind of looked at different makers and famous quilts throughout the years. And through a balloting process, they picked the 100 best quilts. And we were very, very fortunate that year to have about 80 of them actually on display. Some of them were lost to time, but quite a number that we had on display had never been shown outside of private collections or museum collections before. But because this was such an important event, we're able to get them for that. And that remains, of all the exhibits, hundreds of exhibits we've had over the years at Festival, that remains a highlight for a lot of people. Again, the quilts have a particular emotional impact with people because I would walk through that exhibit and it was very specially done with special walls and things like that. I mean, I would walk through and people would be crying in front of quilts and say to us, you know, I've seen pictures of this for years. I never thought I would get to see it in person. So that was an amazing exhibit. And there was a magazine produced out of that with pictures and stories about all the 100 quilts. It's now out of print, but it still remains a collector's item for people.
And what's that magazine called?
The 20th Century's Best American Quilts.
Okay, good. Well, maybe some of it's a collector's item, so I'm sure it's a price tag on it, but maybe some of our listeners can find it.
Occasionally I'll pop up on eBay or something like that.
Right. eBay, you can find anything for collector's items, almost anything. Lastly, I want to touch on the exhibit. There was a first showing of antique quilts from the collection of the Daughters of the American Revolution at the Houston International Quilt Show. And in particular, it says, including a quilt made by the wife of Star Spangled Banner author Francis Scott Key. What was that like?
That was another very, very impressive exhibit. We partnered with the Daughters of the American Revolution with their quilt collection, and these were a lot of antique quilts from the 1700s and 1800s that were kept. It's still in amazingly good condition. And the particular interest there was just the incredible handwork that was done on these quilts. Because again, this was obviously pre-machine. And those quilts were just simply amazing to look at. Again, we had a special display area for those, including the quilt made by the wife of Francis Scott Key.
Wow, that's amazing. It's just amazing that these things would last over hundreds of years. And obviously the work that you say, the artwork that they put into it and handcrafted is just amazing to think that we still have possessions of. Which brings me to the question. Let me ask you this. What is the method of preserving these quilts? I mean, do they just say, hey, we're going to put them in plastic bags? Or I don't mean to simplify it because I don't know how it's done, but how do you keep something like that from, washing away in history?
Well, there are different ways to preserve quilts. The most important thing is to never put a quilt in a washing machine. That is a cardinal sin for just because they're so delicate and the threadwork could come out. So there are various ways to preserve quilts, but one important thing is to refold them every so often so they don't have creases in them. So some people have what's called an airing of the quilts every so often. So they'll unpack quilts, unfold them, let them hang, and then refold them in a different manner so the creases don't show up. We also recommend that people put their quilts in archival boxes with acid-free paper and different ways to protect that. And those are, of course, a lot of what people do with not just the antique quilts, but the contemporary quilts. You mentioned a lot of the more traditional exhibits we've had at the show, but we also have many exhibits of what are called art quilts. And those are very much more modern looking quilts. Some almost look like fabric paintings.
Let me ask you this. What, on opening day, when you sit back and you look and you see all these people coming in, what is it? What's the feeling that you have?
Wonder. I would say it's always a feeling of wonder. I never get tired of standing in that hallway when we open the doors and people just start pouring in. And it's particularly when they come by the entrance where all the quilts are displayed. And there's just, I've seen jaws literally drop. And when they walk in, it's like almost a Willy Wonka quilting wonderland for people. And I'm always excited when people get to see the works that we have on display for the quilting section. Also, when they go into the vendor section, they've got all the new fabrics and sewing machines. So I guess it's what I always appreciate and like seeing is just the sense of wonder on people's faces when they first kind of cross that carpeted threshold at the George R. Brown.
Right, right. Well, I can only imagine what it's like. I know growing up in Houston, and you know about Houston, is probably something like a kid when the first time they get to go to Astro World or the Astrodome, when those things were, you just couldn't wait. You always saw it or heard about it. So I can imagine people, as you mentioned earlier, they save their money forever, or it's a surprise gift to them that this is just a sight to behold with, 40 to 50,000 contemporaries, there with you. Which brings me to the communal. We talked about this earlier, the church groups and the communal aspects, but it seems so interesting in that, a lot of artistry is done by themselves. I mean, you could think of somebody from back in the time, famous artist like Picasso or something. You would never think that he would get together with all his buddies and, hey man, let's do some painting together and so forth. What do you think made, you touched on it earlier, people got to talk, but made it a communal thing where people got together to do quilting? What sets that apart from other artists?
I think because quilting can be a much more communal art form. With the quilting bees, kind of like probably the ones your grandmother attended, it was a lot of people working on one project together. So one woman might be at one end of the quilt doing stitching there, somebody's at the other one, and you're all kind of facing each other while you're doing it. And of course, when you're in a circle facing each other, that's much more conducive to conversation, sharing stories, things like that. So it's working on kind of the same project together. Now, that said, in today's Zoom era, there are online quilting bees where people are working on their quilts individually, but they're still seeing each other on screen and sharing their stories and talking about their artwork or talking about their lives. So quilting has always been a very communal thing. It's not necessarily just somebody working alone.
Wow. You just explained something to me that I didn't, I guess, get the picture of, like working on one quilt together. I was thinking everybody had their own quilt and so forth. That's how I remembered it as a child, but they probably were working on one quilt. But that truly is something that will bring people together when you're working on a shared project like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's part of the history.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Bob, let me ask you this: when you meet people for the first time who've come there for the first time, what's the feedback that you get?
Usually the size. It's the size of the show we have at the George R. Brown. Again, the show is not as big as it was pre-COVID, but it's still the largest quilt show in the world. So I think when people come in, they're mostly impressed with just the size of it when you put together all the classes and the vendors and the quilts on display. We have very few rules at Quilt Festival, but one of them that we typically tell people, especially first-time attendees, is wear comfortable shoes, because there is a lot to see and a lot to do and a lot of walking.
Okay. When you get into the we're about to get into the festival now. We just kind of talked about how, this year's coming festival, and it seems really, really interesting. So we'll walk our audience through this year's festival coming up. But let me ask you this: when you do the festival, obviously there's historical aspect. I would say, let's just say, call it tradition. How do you balance the festival with tradition with innovation?
Well, in terms of the special exhibits we have, these are the quilts on display. We normally have about 35 individually themed exhibits. And we always strike a balance between showing traditional quilts and modern quilts and art quilts and quilts of different styles and techniques. We've even had garments before. And then we also have a large judge show where people send in their quilts from all over the world for a competition where we have prizes. So it's almost like the Academy Awards of quilting when these prizes are given away. So we always make sure that regardless of what style you like of quilting, whether, again, the modern or the historical, there's something to see. And then, of course, that always makes it easier for people to learn new things. I mean, maybe if you're only interested in traditional quilting and you see what's being done more recently with art quilts, it might open your horizons.
Okay, that's really so. When you have many classes, when you go on the website and you look at the different classes and so forth, can you tell us what goes into the planning with a show this huge? What goes into your planning, and how far out do you plan? Because I already see that you have 2026 up, so I'm just amazed that it seems like something that's monumental in planning.
Well, it's always funny when people come up to me at the show during the show and they say things like, "Well, what do you do the rest of the year?" And there's so many moving parts and nuts and bolts that go into planning, putting on and creating our festival. We literally start a year in advance. So at the end of this year's show is when we'll start planning exhibits and teachers and classes for the next year's show. And it's a lot of moving parts, both with the convention center and sponsors and people with the exhibits and our team. We have not a lot of full-time employees, but we bring in an army of people to help with the show. And a lot of these, we call them our Peace Corps, PIECE, because piecing, of course, is part of quilting. And they come in and they handle the quilts and they work just the show. So we bring in a lot of volunteers and workers to help us actually put on the largest quilt show in the world.
Wow, I like that, the Peace Corps. Okay, that's really cool. So okay, so we go. So a person goes to the website. They say, "Okay, man, I like what they're talking about. I want to go to the quilt show. I've been thinking about it. I've never gone." So they go to quilts.com, correct?
Correct. Quilts.com.
Quilts.com, and they'll see the show lineup for 2025, all the happenings, all the goings on of the festival. And so the festival takes place October 9th through the 12th at the George R. Brown Convention Center. But it mentions October 8th, preview night. Can you tell us what that's all about?
Sure. What preview night is, a lot of conventions have preview night. It's kind of a sneak peek at everything, and all of our vendors are open and all of the quilts are on display. So these are where a lot of the hardest of the hardcore quilters come, because they want to get in as early as possible to see the quilts and shop the vendors. We also have classes that start several days before the show even starts. So we have a lot of students from those classes that wrap up with their lessons for the day, and then they get to come to preview night and see everything.
Wow. So let me ask you this. So let's go into the world of the classes. I'm interested in quilting. I'm thinking about taking it up as a hobby, but I've never stitched anything together. What would be a class that I would go to?
Well, luckily on our class catalog, which is online at quilts.com, we not only list all of the classes, but have a lot of information about what they involve, the teachers, the techniques, and we've got a lot of codes. So for beginning quilt classes, they have a code B, and you can actually go to our website and see them categorized like that. So if you're only interested in beginning classes, or only interested in applique, or only interested in embroidery, you don't have to sift through the entire catalog. You can look at that breakdown and see which classes interest you the most.
Wow, that's awesome. And you have to go to this. It's so many classes I wouldn't believe, but I would tell you this. You better hurry, because everywhere I look, I see sold out. But so if you really want to be in one of these classes, you better make a move quick. And I just want to touch on a few of the classes just to kind of get your perspective on. I see a class called I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right, but Charlotte and Gotti, and it says, "Let me surprise you." That's a class, and I'm gonna get to let you expound on those. And I saw another one sold out. It says beginning free motion quilting. What is "Let me surprise you" about, and then free motion quilting? What does that mean?
Well, Charlotte and Gotti is one of our most popular teachers, and she's just a hilarious person individually as well. So she's known for her Let Me Surprise You classes, where you don't really know what you're making until you get to the class. And so there's a lot of fun that people have with kind of not knowing what they're going to be doing till they get there, and they can kind of work on this thing all at the same time, the project and the quilt. So if you're brave and and want to know something new or different, the surprise classes are always great. And free motion quilting is where you're moving the fabric around the sewing machine as opposed to vice versa. And free motion quilting allows you to kind of direct where you want the stitches to go anywhere on your quilt. And that's a very, very particular skill set in itself.
Wow. So I didn't quite see the number, but how many classes?
We have this year close to 250 different classes, lectures, and events. And again, they are for all skill levels. And one of the great things about our website is that we have class project photos up there as well, so people can kind of see a little bit about what they're going to create. Also, most of our teachers are very open to communicating with students prior to the class if they have any concerns or questions before they might want to sign up for it.
Great, great. Okay, so tell me about the quilt market.
Yeah, and actually the vast majority of people that come to the show tend to just come to shop the show and then look at the quilts on display. So when you're signing up for classes, there is a whole registration process you have to go through. But if you just want to come up to the door and buy a ticket to shop and see the quilts, that's what a lot of people do.
Awesome, awesome. And I see here it says St. Louis. So what is the connection with St. Louis here?
Well, we have another show called International Quilt Market, and that is a trade show for the industry. So that's not open to the public. You have to be in the industry and have credentials to attend that show. And that's where wholesalers are basically taking orders from quilt shop owners and quilt businesses for product. So we have a fall one that's in Houston that always precedes the festival, which is the public show. And then this year we're having our spring edition again, and that will take place next April in St. Louis.
Wow, wow. So when you look at I'm going through on the left-hand side, the different categories you have on the website, and I see the quilt gallery, and it looks like this year's Celebrate Life. So can you expound on that a little bit? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, actually, our quilt gallery on our website kind of shows a lot of our popular exhibits from the previous show. So if you weren't able to make it out to Houston last year, you could still see quite a number of the quilts that were on display, at least online in our quilt gallery. So that was Celebrate Life. We're having it again this year with a 2025 edition. And these are just quilts on the theme of celebrating life and high points in people's lives.
Wow, that's awesome. So you mentioned how people come up to you and they talk and what it means to them, and you've seen some of the emotions that are shared when they see the quilt. What would you say is the most touching story you've heard from an attendee?
Well, I think collectively it was when we had the America from the Heart, the September 11th quilts. So our show is typically in late October. And when the events happened in 2001 of September 11th, as you can recall, the world and particularly the country was in disarray. We didn't even know if we were going to be able to have a show that year, even though it had been announced and prepared for a year. So Carrie decided that what quilters do a lot of times is they pour their emotions into their artwork. So she decided to put out a call for September 11th or patriotic themed quilts that people would create. And then she said, if you make these quilts, we'll display them at the show. Well, we were expecting maybe a couple dozen because it was literally 6 weeks before we opened our doors. And we were shocked that several hundred quilts came in from all over the world. Amazing quilts just showing patriotism and the Twin Towers. There was even an Osama bin Laden quilt with little army men stitched into the quilt like they were attacking him. And it was just an amazing exhibit. And so we hung this specially in the center of our show, what we call Main Street. And it was just an emotionally impactful impactful exhibit. We had to constantly replace the Kleenex boxes that we had on tables all throughout the exhibit because people were just overcome with emotion when they saw these. And we also produced a book for that called America from the Heart. And that remains one of the most highlight exhibits that we've ever had at the show.
Wow. Fascinating. Great story. So just a couple more questions from you. The time is flying past, and I'm not gonna hold you much longer. But what would you say is the main mission of the Houston International Quilt Show?
I would say it's twofold: to spread the love and creativity that quilting is, but also to show people that it is an art form, as I mentioned earlier, like painting, like drawing, like sculpture. Just because the medium is in fabric doesn't mean it shouldn't be held in as high esteem as all those other creative art forms. And again, when people come and they see the exhibits of quilts, and they're shocked to believe that those are actually quilts on display.
Right. That's great. So when they go to the festival and they walk out and they see Bob, what are you hoping that, the next generation of quilters? In fact, let me ask you this before I get to that question. When I was growing up in high school, and probably yourself also, they had classes like homemaking or sewing and so forth. I don't know that they do that anymore. Do you find that there is, you mentioned like online quilting, and I imagine that there was a lot of that during the pandemic, but how has that integrated, from social media to online to the whole technology? Do you still, it sounds like quilting has built, it's insular from that. It doesn't have to worry about, so many people are worried about AI and so forth doing that, but where do you see quilting going in the next few decades?
Well, you hit the nail on the head earlier when you mentioned that during the pandemic, a lot of people were home with a lot of time on their hands, and quilting saw a real spike in interest. Sewing machines sales started going through the roof during the pandemic because people wanted to do something more tactical. And in the modern era, YouTube and quilting videos have really introduced a lot of people who might not be able to fly to Houston to attend a class, or might not be able to have any quilting class around them. They're learning how to quilt and seeing each other's work on YouTube. They're posting their work on Instagram. So online communities have really done a lot to introduce younger people and a newer audience to quilting that we might not have reached before.
Okay, that's really, really cool. So I'm not going to hold you up much longer, but you sound like someone who's very passionate about your work and what you are accomplishing at the Houston International Quilt Festival. So what's your dream for the future of the Quilt Festival? Where would you like it to be in the next decade or so?
I would love for two things. And one we touched on before, to have younger quilters and a newer generation really embrace the art form. We're seeing it a lot lately with young sewists that are maybe not jumping into quilting immediately, but they're starting with kind of DIY home deck projects or clothes or pillows or things like that. And then we're hoping that they advance into quilting. My great hope for the show is that we are able to go back to the size that we were previously, pre-pandemic, and just have more people come and quilt and more people just appreciate the artistry of what it is.
Well, thank you so much, Bob Ruggiero of the Houston International Quilt Festival. I really appreciate you taking the time to give us the Fest Chronicles insight about the festival, and I hope that you have many, many more, and we really appreciate your time. What would you like to tell the audience about if they say, hey, they're on the fence about coming? What would you tell them?
Well, first, Jeffrey, I'd like to thank you for having me on as a guest. I really appreciate that. And I can tell that your background and history with quilting through your grandmother comes from a place of joy and a place of love. And I just love hearing stories like that. For somebody who is not sure about whether they want to come to the show or not, I would say first check out our website, which is quilts.com. And also just check out Quilter's various websites. A lot of them have posted all kinds of video that they've taken from previous editions of the show, and you can see it all there. But if you want to either learn about quilting or you're already a quilter, Houston is the place to be.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Folks, definitely check out the website and make your plans to be at the Houston International Quilt Show and Festival. Appreciate it, Bob, and we'll let you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Fest Chronicles, where festivals come to life through the voices of the people who make the magic happen behind the scenes. If you enjoyed today's journey, click that like button, hit subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on Spotify so you never miss the next fest-filled adventure. And hey, don't keep the fun all to yourself. Share this episode with a friend or family member you love going to festivals with. Until next time, keep showing up, keep creating joy, and keep believing in the power of community, one celebration at a time.